It's time to talk about the Masonic conspiracy. Today I'm going to tell you what I personally know. Who are the Freemasons? Where did they come from? And what do we actually know about them? What is this so-called Masonic conspiracy? Does it even exist? So today, let's talk about the Masons. Who are the Masons? In legal terms, Masons are a closed society, an organization that allows only those who have been initiated. They have their own code of honor, their own rules, their own procedures for meetings, rituals, and so on. History tells us that Freemasonry is a religious political movement that arose in modern times as a secret international organization with mystical rites and with the goal of moral perfection. Masons gathered in their lodges to talk about philosophy, about the structure of the universe, about how to understand oneself and how to understand God. It was, in essence, a kind of philosophical club. The Masons themselves, however, describe their organization differently. For example, the Grand Orient of France, one of the oldest French lodges, describes itself as a philanthropic, philosophical, and progressive institute whose purpose is the search for truth, the study of morality, and the practice of solidarity. It all sounds very abstract. Search for truth, solidarity, and so on. You don't really understand what these people do or why they gather. The United Grand Lodge of England, on the other hand, describes itself as the largest non-religious, non-political, fraternal, and charitable organization. And indeed, this lodge collects vast sums of money for charity. In fact, the Masons have always been involved in charity, and still are today. Where did Freemasonry come from? According to the Masons themselves, their history supposedly goes back to Adam himself, a very ancient system of beliefs and a sacred brotherhood of enlightened men who understood philosophy and the divine order of the world. There's a famous Masonic legend about Hiram Abiff, the legendary builder of Solomon's temple. If Adam was the first man, then Hiram, they say, was the first builder. Hiram had 3 apprentices. At some point, they demanded that he reveal his secrets, the secrets of construction, even the secrets of the universe, and certain sacred words of the master. But Hiram refused. In anger, the apprentices attacked him inside the temple. One struck him with a compass, wounding him. Bleeding, Hiram ran to another exit, where the second apprentice struck him with a square. Stumbling toward the third gate, the one that opened to the outside of Solomon's temple, he was met by the third apprentice, who hit him on the head with a wooden mallet, killing him. And since then, the compass, square, and mallet have become some of the key symbols of Freemasonry. Each of them is interpreted differently by different lodges. The compass as a magical instrument, measuring the limits of one's knowledge and closeness to God. The square as a symbol of moral alignment and balance. After the murder, the apprentices buried Hiram's body in secret, and no one could find it for a long time. Later, King Solomon ordered the body to be found. They discovered the grave by a small branch of acacia stuck into the ground above it. Since then, the acacia branch has also become a Masonic symbol, a symbol of immortality. That, according to Masonic legend, is where Freemasonry begins. What does the word Mason actually mean? The term comes from freestone mason, literally, a free stoneworker. In the Middle Ages, Gothic cathedrals were built not over years, but over centuries. The builders needed to live near the construction sites, so they settled nearby, forming guild-like brotherhoods. You know that in the Middle Ages there was a strict guild system. Some worked with jewelry, some were blacksmiths, others were tanners, and these were the builders. Thus, freestone masons, or Freemasons, were the free builders who worked with stone. So the roots of Freemasonry lie not in philosophy or mysticism, but simply in the builders' guilds of the Middle Ages. They would gather to exchange craft secrets, discuss news, and live within their own professional community, largely isolated from outsiders. At that stage, there were no rituals or charters, just professional gatherings of craftsmen. But over time, others began to join: merchants, officials, scholars, people not directly connected to construction. And since a closed club cannot spend its whole life talking only about masonry, they began discussing business, politics, society, the church, and philosophy. Gradually, this professional guild evolved into a philosophical fraternity. Most historians and Freemasons agree that modern Freemasonry officially began on June 24, 1717. On the feast day of St. John the Baptist, 4 London lodges of builders met at the tavern called the Goose and Gridiron to form the first Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. The 18th century became the golden age of Freemasonry. How is Freemasonry organized? Lodges and temples. Today, different Masonic obediences, jurisdictions, differ in rituals, the number of degrees, ceremonies, and constitutions. I condensed what's common across sources into a clear summary. A lodge, from the medieval lodge, as guardhouse or small house, was originally a structure at a building site where workers stored tools and rested. Hence the name. Today, lodge can also mean an upscale hunting house or safari hotel. Each lodge has a distinctive name, a number, and a orient, the geographic location of the lodge. Meetings are held in Masonic temples. These are not temples in the usual religious sense, though some buildings look monumental. The headquarters of the United Grand Lodge of England is literally temple-like. Several lodges can meet in the same building, often called a Masonic hall or Masonic house, with multiple rooms for different lodges. Early lodges were literally named after the taverns where the Masons met: the Crown, the Apple Tree, the Goose and Gridiron, already mentioned, and the Grapes. Today, Freemasonry is often described as comprising 30,000 lodges worldwide, with anywhere from 5 to 10 million members. Figures vary. Critically, there is no single global center, no Pope of Masonry, no supreme world Grand Master. Each national or regional Grand Lodge is sovereign within its jurisdiction. They recognize each other, or not, but do not command one another. That's why talk of one unified global chain of command is, organizationally, incorrect. Members call each other brethren. Inside the craft, there are multiple rites and appendant bodies, but 2 baseline systems are most often referenced. 2 major systems: Swedish and English, the Swedish Rite, c. 1750, Carl Friedrich Eklef. Admission required the candidate to be a Christian. This is significant because, in later centuries, critics accused Masons of atheism or even Satanism. Historically, in the Swedish Rite, explicit Christian faith was a prerequisite. It has 11 degrees. The head is styled VSV, Vicarius Salomonis Sapientissimi, Deputy of the Most Wise Solomon. The 3 dots are themselves a common Masonic sigil, symbolizing the union of opposites in higher harmony. The English, or emulation system. Here, a candidate must profess belief in a supreme being, but not necessarily within Christianity. Any faith is accepted. Practices evolved over time. Once, many jurisdictions excluded Muslims, women, and non-white applicants. Today, the UGLE shows diverse membership. The English system consists of 3 craft degrees only. 1. Entered apprentice. 2. Fellow craft. 3. Master Mason. The first 3 degrees are worked in so-called blue lodges, or craft lodges. Advancement into other Masonic bodies, York Rite, Scottish Rite, etc., generally requires being a Master Mason in good standing. Some rites, like the Scottish Rite, confer degrees from 4 degree or up to 32 totodegree, with a 33-degree honorary. Each degree symbolizes deeper levels of moral, philosophical, and symbolic instruction. In some high degrees, allegories speak of knowing the ineffable name of God. The superstructure blends philosophy, biblical typology, and, historically, elements of alchemical and hermetic symbolism, which, naturally, added to the aura of mystery. Symbols of Freemasonry. We already met the compass, square, and mallet from the Hiram legend. There are many others commonly seen. All-seeing eye, radiant sun, divine providence. You'll see it, for instance, on the Kazan Cathedral facade in St. Petersburg. Rule and plumb line, equality of men and upright conduct. Protractor, angle measure. Justice. Compass, universality and spiritual measure. Square, conscience, rectitude. Rough ashlar, raw stone. Unrefined human nature, perfect ashlar, cubical stone. Virtue shaped by discipline. Gavel, hammer, authority and self-mastery. Trowel, charity toward others, strictness toward oneself. Acacia sprig, immortality and remembrance, from Hiram's grave. Skull and crossbones, coffin, contempt for death, and mourning the eclipse of truth. Round hat, liberty. Drawn sword, the law that punishes. Dagger, readiness to die rather than betray an oath. Seals, the common motif is a circle enclosing two interlaced equilateral triangles, one pointing up, one down, or simply the hexagram. Secret tokens, words, and signs. Freemasons historically used ways to recognize one another. Special handshakes, grips, sometimes described as a subtle press with the thumb to signal a specific degree. Rings and signets bearing Masonic emblems. Password and countersigns. A well-known gesture, the hand inside the waistcoat, signifying a heart devoted to the Masonic obligations. The image is biblically colored. Put now thine hand into thy bosom, where the bosom symbolizes the inner man, the heart. You'll notice this pose in numerous portraits: Napoleon, Kutuzov, Kerensky, all associated, in various sources, with Masonry or close to it. For the record, Stalin often posed likewise, but claims he was a Mason are not credible. The rise of Freemasonry, an 18th century. The 18th century was Masonry's high noon. Alongside the Hiram legend, a new self-mythology appeared, that Freemasonry was a spiritual heir to two medieval currents. One, the Knights Templar, who, during the Crusades, absorbed Eastern wisdom and Kabbalistic secrets, learned the transmutation of metals, etc. After their suppression under Philip the Fair, some survived in Portugal or Scotland, according to legend, ceding the Scottish rite. 2. The Rosicrucians of the German lands, who preserved esoteric Christian Hermetic knowledge in mysterious tracts, later also merging into Masonic currents. Thus, Masons portrayed themselves not merely as witty clubmen, but as custodians of a primordial tradition. This was the Age of Enlightenment. Montesquieu, Voltaire, Franklin, Jefferson, Locke. Thinkers who profoundly influenced public life and, indirectly, revolutions. Many of them were Masons or Masonic adjacent. Freemasonry became fashionable among elites. Let's be frank. While admission is theoretically open, Masonry historically skewed to the elite. Politicians, grandees, wealthy merchants, princes of the blood. When such people meet in a closed forum, they do not discuss only theology. They discuss politics, commerce, society. Hence, the persistent suspicion, they must be plotting. As you'll see later in the 20th century, sometimes such suspicions had substance. Ziuatbanofer Martinez de Pasquale and the elect priests, Cohens. In the 18th century, ritual complexity soared. Martinez de Pasquale devised an order called the Order of Knights Masons Elect Priests of the Universe, Elus Cohens. Cohen is the Jewish priestly caste, a connection later exploited by Russian ultranationalists to coin the slur Judeo-Masons. Pasquale's system drastically complicated initiation, adding long psalm readings and heavy mysticism. The philosopher-mystic Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, who barely escaped the French Revolution, once asked if reading psalms for 6 hours was truly necessary to know God. Pasquale replied, "It's not strictly necessary, but I have nothing better to offer." Alchemy, ritual magic, and hermetic lore flooded in. Pasquale set up elite lodges in Bordeaux, Montpellier, and Paris, super-exclusive clubs within the broader Masonic scene, feeding the impression that men who rule meet behind closed doors. Count Cagliostro, Giuseppe Balsamo. You know him as Count Cagliostro, a starring role in films and novels. In reality, Giuseppe Balsamo was a brilliant con artist. Born in Italy, he slid into document forgery and selling fake gems. He married the beautiful Lorenza, adopted the more aristocratic surname Cagliostro, and stitched on a bogus count's title. He fled to London after a brush with justice, did time in a debtor's prison, and helped by his wife resurfaced as Great Magus Count Cagliostro. He predicted lottery numbers, healed the sick, boasted he was 300, 500 years old, and forced his servants to claim they had served him for centuries. He flaunted rings with huge stones of his own manufacture, gifting them theatrically, a trifle worth half of London. With fame secured, he toured France, Poland, Courland, and finally St. Petersburg. Under Catherine the Great, he was welcomed, largely because Grigory Potemkin favored him and reportedly fancied Lorenza. Legend says Cagliostro multiplied Potemkin's gold by alchemical means, in reality, likely sleight of hand and substitution. He told Catherine she'd be history's greatest Tsarina, a safe bet, retrospectively true. His overreach, reviving a dead infant, exposed as a swap by midwives. Add an embassy letter debunking his military boasts. Add rumors about Lorenza and Potemkin, and Cagliostro was expelled from Russia. Later entangled in the affair of the diamond necklace in France, he ended badly in an Italian prison, a roof-entry cell to prevent escape. Lorenza testified against him and died in a convent. He died soon after, possibly poisoned. He always claimed Masonic initiation, likely true, at least nominally, trading on Masonic mystique to boost his grift. Where there is mystery, there are charlatans. Peter the Great and the Masons in Russia. In Russia, Masons allegedly appeared during the reign of Peter the Great. Some even claim Peter himself was the first Russian Mason. According to legend, while studying shipbuilding and trades in Europe, he was secretly initiated into a lodge by none other than the great English architect, Sir Christopher Wren. There's no documentary proof, but the myth persisted. By Peter's time, the idea of free builders had already reached Russia, and small Masonic circles began forming. Under Empress Anna Ioannovna, the movement took firmer root. Under Catherine the Great, it blossomed. Influential nobles such as Ivan Yelagin headed Russian lodges, and at first, Catherine viewed them favorably. By 1787, there were about 145 lodges across the empire, an enormous number. They met not only in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but also in provincial towns, in the army, and even in the navy. The two main centers were, of course, the capital and Moscow. Initially, the Empress saw nothing threatening. Yelagin was loyal. The members discussed philosophy, ethics, and charity. Catherine herself read Voltaire and corresponded with Montesquieu. But soon courtiers whispered, "Your Majesty, your heir Paul is a Mason." That changed everything. The heir indoctrinated by unknown men could tomorrow stage a coup, just as Catherine herself had once seized power on the bayonets of the guards. Russian Masons always swore loyalty. Tsar and fatherland above lodge. Yet when Catherine began her first persecutions, she summoned Yelagin and others for questioning. They insisted their oaths to the sovereign outweighed any Masonic vows. Still, the very phrasing "to the true ruler of Russia" made Catherine wonder, did they mean her late husband Peter III? Suspicion hardened into repression. This was the time of architect Bazanov, who filled his estate at Tsaritsino with Masonic symbolism, and of publisher-philanthropist Nikolai Novikov, whose story became legendary. The Novikov Case. Novikov, a Moscow intellectual and philanthropist, ran a printing house, funded schools, built stone houses for peasants. Early in Catherine's reign, he playfully mocked the government in satire, but later was accused of plotting treason. The Moscow governor confronted him. "You print Masonic literature? You correspond with French Masons? I even found your cipher," showing him a book's table of contents. The absurdity didn't matter. Novikov, already elderly, was dragged off by a hussar detachment to the Schlisselburg fortress. The official verdict was almost comical. Nothing proven, but clearly up to something terrible. Let him sit. When Catherine died, her son Paul Farmt freed Novikov on the first day of his reign, a sign of how swiftly Masons protected their own. Catherine had indeed launched Russia's first true campaign against Masonry. Meanwhile, across Europe, the French Revolution exploded. To monarchs, it looked as though the philosophers, the very same freethinkers once celebrated, had now unleashed chaos. And who met secretly across Europe? The Masons. The conclusion was obvious. They must have prepared the revolution to behead all kings and overturn every throne. The French Revolution and the birth of conspiracy. In the eyes of horrified monarchies, the Jacobin terror proved that Franc Masons, the French term, were organizing revolutions across the continent. The same refrain sounded in Austria, Germany, Italy, and Russia. A worldwide Masonic revolution to dethrone lawful sovereigns and install their brethren. The fear spread even to language. In Russian criminal slang, the French franc-maçon transformed into pharmazon, a word meaning freethinker or schemer. "What are you pharmazoning about?" meant, stop questioning the order of things. Later, pharmazon chic came to mean swindler selling stolen or fake jewels, a curious linguistic descent from Freemason to con artist. Masonic mystique and Napoleon. After the revolution came Napoleon Bonaparte, often labeled a Mason, or at least a man sympathetic to Masonry. All of his brothers were initiated, that much is certain. In Russia, Catherine's persecutions ended with her death. Paul I, himself a Mason, ascended the throne, but ruled briefly before his assassination. Then came Alexander I, initially liberal and friendly toward the lodges. Many Russian officers were Masons. Kutuzov, by his own admission, joined to subdue the flesh. He loved wine and women, and hoped Masonry would instill discipline. It didn't. He remained a bon vivant to the end. Some say even Suvorov was affiliated. Thus, during the Napoleonic Wars, Masons fought on both sides. When Russian officers captured French prisoners, they sometimes exchanged secret signs. "We are brethren." Such prisoners were treated differently. Alexander I further knew of this and tolerated it. But by the 1820s, he turned deeply religious, influenced by the mystic elder Photios. Once again, secret societies smelled of conspiracy. In 1822, Alexander issued a decree banning Masonry outright. All lodges were closed, members recorded, secret meetings forbidden. Where people meet in secret, he believed, treason will follow. Among the Decembrists who rose on the Senate Square, Masons were plentiful, and that too was later remembered against them. Masonic symbols in Imperial Russia walk through St. Petersburg. You'll see on the Alexander column the all-seeing eye, a Masonic emblem. It wasn't added casually. Emperor Nicholas IV approved it, honoring the contribution of Russian Masons to the victory over Napoleon. The same eye radiates above the portico of the Kazan Cathedral. Kutuzov's funeral followed Masonic ritual elements, though the craft was officially outlawed. Despite bans, lodges survived underground. Then came the next resurgence. 1905, amid revolution. Masonic circles re-emerged among nobles and industrialists. And where there is action, there is counteraction. Judeo-Masons and Russian reaction. Now appeared the Black Hundreds, the union of Michael the Archangel, and the new slur, Judeo-Masons. It drew on that 18th century link to the elect Cohen's order. Cohen means priest in Judaism. Reactionary writers fused anti-Semitism with anti-Masonry. The Jews and Masons have conspired to destroy Holy Russia. According to this nationalist myth, Masons surrounded Nicholas II with spies and orchestrated the empire's collapse. They pointed to Alexander Kerensky, an acknowledged Mason, as proof. In reality, of course, the causes of revolution were socio-economic and political, not Masonic. At most, Masonry was a minor undercurrent in a sea of upheaval. Still, in the early 20th century, lodges again attracted aristocrats and industrial magnates. They maintained international ties, especially with the French and English obediences, and operated freely within the empire. Freemasonry in modern Russia. Freemasonry survived into the post-Soviet era. The Grand Lodge of Russia was founded in 1995, recognized by more than 100 foreign lodges. It began with 4 lodges, 2 in Moscow, 1 in St. Petersburg, 1 in Voronezh, and quickly expanded. Its first Grand Master was Georgy Dergachev until 2007, succeeded by Andrei Bogdanov, who still heads Russian Masonry after more than 15 years. That's the current Grand Master of Russia. By the way, during research for a documentary on the rap group Center, I discovered that Ptaha, yes, the rapper, is also a Mason. He's responsible for the Widow's Cup. What is that? At the end of meetings, a brother passes a cup among members who drop coins inside to aid widows and brothers in distress. Masons sometimes call themselves the children of the widow, hence the Widow's Cup, a communal fund. So yes, Masons exist in today's Russia. The theory of conspiracy and the secret government. As soon as the elite joins any movement, secrecy follows. Freemasonry was never meant for the common man. It was a society for the educated and influential. And where there is secrecy among the elite, myths begin to swirl. Some of those myths were pure fantasy, others not entirely. Masonic lodges certainly practiced lobbying, mutual advancement, and political influence. The great French diplomat Talleyrand was a Mason, as were many ministers and financiers. Naturally, state matters were discussed behind closed doors. The idea of a world Masonic conspiracy was popularized by a Frenchman named Léo Taxil. In 1890, he published a book titled The Devil in the 19th Century. Within its pages was everything a conspiracy theorist could dream of. Masons, like the Templars before them, worship Baphomet, perform human sacrifices, drink the blood of infants, and secretly control the world through bankers, industrialists, and politicians. Taxil even presented the confessions of a certain Miss Diana Vaughan, a supposed female Mason who had repented and revealed all their dark secrets. Later, Taxil publicly admitted the whole story was a hoax. He had invented everything, and the woman was an actress. But of course, conspiracy believers simply said, obviously they forced him to say that. The Masons got to him. And so, the myth lived on. The biggest Masonic scandal of the 20th century. Yet not all was myth. There was one real enormous scandal in modern times. The Italian Lodge Propaganda 2, or P2. Originally founded in the 19th century, P2 operated as a regular Masonic lodge until 1976. Then a man named Licio Gelli, a businessman, banker, writer, and political operator, rose through its ranks. Gelli's past was colorful. In the 1930s, he fought for Franco's fascists in Spain, later joined Mussolini's movement, and after World War II reinvented himself as an industrialist. By the 1970s, he had money, influence, and ambition. When the Grand Master of Italian Masonry expelled him, Gelli threatened to release compromising files and was reinstated. Soon, he took full control of P2. In 1980, Italian police raided his villa on a financial case and found 30 notebooks, a complete membership list, and personal files on every member. Those notebooks reached the Prime Minister's desk, and a political earthquake followed. It turned out P2 had hundreds of high-ranking members: ministers, intelligence officers, bankers, newspaper owners, publishers, and even future Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. They controlled media outlets, banks, and political networks across Italy. The lodge had ties to the Vatican Bank, to the mafia, and was suspected of links to terror incidents, including the kidnapping and murder of Prime Minister Aldo Moro, and the deadly Bologna train station bombing that killed 80 people. Some investigators believed Gelli was being funded by the CIA to stoke anti-communist violence throughout Italy. The government collapsed. An enormous investigation began, but led to little. Journalists were murdered, bankers found dead in London and Milan, and witnesses disappeared. Eventually, Gelli was jailed for bank fraud connected to the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, escaped to Switzerland, bribed his guards, and fled to Latin America, where he maintained ties with military dictators, many of them also members of P2. He died wealthy in 2015, aged 94, never tried for the conspiracy. So when people speak of a real Masonic plot, that was one. Famous historical Freemasons. Throughout history, many brilliant and controversial people were Masons. Mozart was a Mason. So was Giuseppe Garibaldi, leader of Italian unification. All four of Napoleon's brothers were Masons. Rudyard Kipling, Voltaire, Casanova, Kutuzov, and Russian publisher Novikov, all Masons. In Russia, Ivan Petrovich Turgenev, director of Moscow University, founded the first lodge in Simbirsk in 1784, called the Golden Crown. Playwright Griboyedov belonged to the largest St. Petersburg lodge, the Union of Friends. Pyotr Chadayev joined in 1814. Even the modern terrorist Anders Behring Breivik was an openly registered Mason. The enemies of Freemasonry. Masons always had their opponents. Hitler saw them as a threat and ordered their extermination. During World War II, as many as 200,000 Masons were killed in occupied Europe. In the Soviet Union, all secret societies were illegal. By then, there were no lodges left to ban. Saddam Hussein outlawed Freemasonry in the 1980s, calling it a tool of Zionism and a threat to his rule. Only a few Muslim countries, Turkey, Morocco, Malaysia, and Lebanon, allow Masonic lodges to exist today. The Catholic Church, meanwhile, remains the only major institution that formally prohibits its members from joining Freemasonry. An irony indeed. Masons insist they accept only believers in God, while the Church calls them heretics. Closing reflection. And so ends our brief journey through the world of Freemasonry, a movement wrapped in mystery, philosophy, and endless rumors of a world government. Sometimes those rumors were nonsense, sometimes not entirely. We've seen that in some places, Masons were merely a brotherhood of idealists, and in others, a real network of power and money. Of course, 1 hour cannot cover it all, but now you know the essential facts about the Masons, their legends, their symbols, their rise and decline, and you can decide for yourself. Is Freemasonry a philosophical society or a hidden hand that still pulls the strings of the world? Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more history.